Hi, and welcome to the Thank God for the Beatles podcast. Today's episode is all about the White Album. It's simply one of the most magnificent albums of all time. It sounds as fresh as it did over 50 years ago. I'm your host, Karen, and joining me as co-host is my older brother, Jeff. Hey, Jeff.
Hey there.
We've been Beatle fanatics since the beginning of time, and the Beatles have had a profound influence on our lives, including the music that we write, the instruments that we play, and quite frankly, how we think and what we do with respect to life, love, and society. So we are excited to share our thoughts, our reflections, our experiences living and loving with the White Album. And so first things first, as you know, the brother and sister relationship or dynamic is fraught with potential. And that potential could either really go good or it could get wobbly pretty quickly. So we're going to try not to kill each other today, Jeff, right?
Oh, sure.
And on that note of brother-sister dynamics, when we were young, I was probably in middle school, Jeff was in high school, and
Actually, that was before high school when it came out.
But I'm just thinking of what we did back then is that we would play music before we'd go to school, and Jeffrey was in charge of allowed to use the stereo. And so he would put on a Beatles album. And then as I grew to love the Beatles, I'd be saying, I don't want to hear Beatles 65, put on something else. And so we would get into these huge fights about which album to play. And it just was like my poor mother is just hearing this. And it's like, you guys are going to be late for school. Put something on. And then ultimately you got into Nilsson and Elton John and other people. And it was like, that just sent me into absolute.
Oh, you were apoplectic. Yeah,
yes. So
sure.
that, but that's how important music was, is to start the day with music from the Beatles. And
well, it just reveals the level of passion we felt about it. And you'd be in the mood to hear one particular record, and I'd be in the mood to hear something else. And since I controlled the reins there, apparently I was not pleasing you all the time.
Yes, not taking into account your younger sister's feelings.
That's right. I was not. I was the age of 12 or 13.
Older. I think you're older.
Yeah, probably a little older. I guess I was, at that point, I just was in the mood to put on Beatle music, and I put on what I was going to listen to, and you had the pleasure of just listening to whatever I put on.
Yes. So first impressions of the White Album is that I do recall, I don't know what year, if it was really 68 because I was really young, or after that, but my first impressions of the White Album is that I was so taken by A, that it was a double album, and B, all the goodies that came with it, the poster and the four portraits.
Right.
And that poster was like heaven because I loved Paul and there were lots of Paul pictures. And then it was shocking because of the picture of John without his clothes on. That was a big deal back then. And it was like, but I don't see anything. And so it was like, okay, whatever. And then the four portraits that came with it, I mean, such high quality photographic paper. I mean, what a great gift in addition to, and it's not withstanding, the music within.
Well, we're both visual people, so I think the Beatles were very aware of that when they created the packaging. And the first thing is like you open it and it is like getting a present. So you see the four photographs, stark and straightforward. They're slightly unkempt and unshaven, which portrays some of the attitude that they wanted to give on the record. However, it was anything but that. The record was quite structured and orderly and rehearsed, but gives the feeling of being raw. Also, when you look at the art collage picture, it's very striking and has a controversial picture on it. You also can take that in line with the collage on the record, Revolution Number 9. So it all fits together as one piece, I believe, and that's how they saw it, the album, holistically. But that was my first impression, too, is this is going to be a dynamic ride, and the album starts off that way, with a jet, sound of a jet, and you're taking off into their world.
On Back in the USSR. Well, the other thing with this album is that it had the lyrics on the back of the poster, which was great. And, just to have the four sides of an LP to play and to put on, and it was just a bounty.
Well, bear in mind that was a new thing. Publishing lyrics started with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and we'll get into that on another show. But that was a new thing because I believe John and the others believed that their lyrics counted for something, and they wanted people to be able to follow along. And I love that. So that's just another bonus, another trend that the Beatles started.
So what was what's so important for me and how I look at this album is I just love the tonality of how this was recorded. It's raw. It's also very sophisticated. I mean, it has all elements, but it has such a sound that maybe it's the foundation is the bass and the drums that they did for, Ringo and Paul. But it was just, the songs that I write and record, I want it to sound like the White Album. That to me is the epitome of how albums should sound, rock albums. And at that time in 1968, the White Album in Abbey Road began on May 30th. But before that, the Beatles had recorded demos. And so, this is it's a time when we're listening to Cream and all this heavy, Led Zeppelin is starting, and a much more raw and simplistic music, or back to rock music, is coming forth. And so we'll get into the demos as we talk about each Beatles contributions. Mm-hmm. But coming back from Rishikesh with 27 to 30 songs that they've had is, wow. I mean, it's just amazing.
For our listeners that don't know what Rishikesh is, that's in India, and that was an outing where they all went to at the urging, I think, of George, to find a spiritual leader in clarity with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and they spent some time in India, and it was a very fertile and creative time for them. So.
Well, they did that following in the summer before, when they went to a few lectures when the Maharishi was in London.
Correct.
And then they lost Brian Epstein in August, and things started to change, and they were perhaps looking for that spiritual center. So here they are, and as they were in India at the ashram, they've got their acoustic guitars, so everything is written on acoustic guitar. Mm-hmm. So I think that one way that I think is easy to approach this album is to go through by each Beatle of their songs and what we think of them and the importance, and just let's start with John.
Oh, okay.
So what do you think for you? What are the songs that really speak to you, or that you always play, or find most interesting?
Well, when starting off as a young man, I really love the rock and roll songs. And I love how everybody's got something to hide except for Me and My Monkey showed John's frenetic rock and roll energy and enthusiasm and great vocals. I love that piece of it. And also loved his experimental pieces like Glass Onion, which I still love. And even though John was straight ahead rock and roll, he would allow experimentation on it. For instance, when George Martin later added the strings at the end, that haunting piece at the end of the song, using it as a transition to the next one, the production may have been minimal, but the placement of it is where it counted. And for John, to me, those songs were really, really strong. And also hearing him sing about his mother, Julia, although I did not know at the time Julia was his mother until I'd read the Hunter Davies biography, published, I believe, in 1968. And so we knew that was by his mother, but I did not know Ocean Child meant Yoko, or meant Yoko's name, so more comes out later. It's a very personal record. You feel like with John, everything is from his own experience. But he was also social comment, too, at the same. There was that piece of John, too. Revolution #1, which evolved into Revolution single later on, was also his initial statement and the very first recording they had worked on that record in May.
And also reflects the times, which was so much of the assassination.
Yeah, he actually laid on the experimentation. He laid on the floor to do his vocal.
Yes, for Revolution.
Mm-hmm. And so they were willing to try anything in the doo-wop lyrics. I think it was more of a statement about finding, again, the influence of Maharishi, whether he liked it or not, was there. He's saying, look internally to yourself. The revolution has to be internal before you can make external change.
Well, I do think that I'm not a huge fan of the slower version
No,
on the album. To me, it's just too too slow. It's
a little languorous. I get, yeah.
so the change with John is that John had Yoko with him, and his relationship had just intensified. He had left his wife, and she was attending the sessions, which was something new for the Beatles, and a little shocking perhaps to the other guys. But they're professionals, and they ultimately rose to the challenge and dealt with it and had their little moments and
Sure.
ended up bringing in their wives or girlfriends ultimately.
It was new love, okay? So relatively new. And so the effect of that, like Happiness is a Warm Gun, for instance, shows Yoko's influence. And they actually allowed her on the record in a couple of places. She and Maureen, I believe, was it Maureen Cox, on the Story of Bungalow Bill. She's on that record. She's on that piece. She's vocally already on that record, doing little character pieces, and she's also appears in some tapes on Revolution 9. So she's incorporated.
She had a tremendous part in that. She was helping to organize the tape loops.
Right.
Revolution 9 is how would you describe it? It's like an experimental
audio collage,
performance art type of song that they worked on together.
right?
And that she was quite instrumental in using. And, it's fun to listen to a couple times, but it's not something that I really listen to at all.
No, not something to listen to. But George Martin commented later that it was actually one of his very favorite tracks because it impressed him, the mix of it and how it all put together. And these were also leftovers from previous sessions where they were attempting to do the All Right and John screaming All Right and the Yoko's tape. They brought in a lot of those and mixed that into Revolution 9. So it extended versions of Revolution 1 when he told the group, okay, we can stop now. And the group kept going. He kept, ad-libbing. They used the ad-libs on that record. But on another note, I think that some of the material and the singing on it, like I'm So Tired, beautiful. Brilliant. And it was one of his favorite vocals. John was never stronger, I think, vocally on the Beatles record than on this record. I think his spirit really comes through. This is John Lennon's magnum opus in his tenure with the Beatles.
Well, I'm So Tired is just so amazing. The whole need a drink and you get another cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
Such the
but he's ambivalent about it. He curses Sir Walter Raleigh, who invented the cigarette.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at the core of relationships and of feelings, and so it is. It speaks to the raw nature of this album. And then you look at a song like Dear Prudence, one of my favorites.
Oh, I've neglected that one
because I love the bass part in it, and Paul is the drummer on that, which is probably his best drumming ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a beautiful song, and as many of you know, it was written about Mia Farrow's sister, who at the Maharishi Rishikesh time was so involved with transcendental meditation that she would never really leave her room, and the Beatles and the other guests were kind of worried about her, and so
she ended up making a living out of it too.
Well,
later
she's
on,
a PhD, I think,
PhD in it.
yeah.
So she was taking it super, super seriously. And they say, hey, they just wanted to chill in between, and she wouldn't come out of her room. She was seriously after the lectures would be meditating.
Well,
so
and the thing about that's a very sweet thing of John to be, reaching out to her through song.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The John had a way of doing that. And I didn't understand, when I was young, I didn't understand where Dear Prudence came from. I just loved the tune and the soft guitar on it and how it built up. It's a great tune. Again, these are some of John's best compositions, I think.
So when you listen to Glass Onion, and particularly in the Escher demos, which are the demos that they came back from India with, they went to George's house and they recorded acoustically kind of just their rough sketch, rough draft of the songs.
Right.
And Glass Onion, it sounds somewhat familiar to the demo.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that song, not as much as for the This Is Another Clue for You All, The Walrus Was Paul, all those things for all the people who were going bananas over the Beatles clues.
Mm-hmm.
But more for that crazy bass. The bass, again, it sounds like a Fender bass that he's playing. Not really sure of which one he's playing, but it is unlike what he normally sounds. It's so up there, and it's just very charging.
High in the mix. So it sounds like a double bass almost. It's really strong. I think the song was written again to those fans saying, "Hey guys, tomp it down." He was playing with us a little bit. John was he's dropping clues, and people were always looking for stuff in their music that really wasn't there. So that was John's little tease at the crowds of people, a little slight dig at saying, "Guys, look, you're taking this way too seriously." So he decided to throw in everything, strawberry fields, and talking about all these other references, and making more. And the walrus was Paul, referring to when Paul was wearing the walrus suit on the during Magical Mystery Tour. So all of that stuff, he's just trying to give it a meaning and give it a kind of ominous feel at the end. I think John was kind of playing with us, and the whole thing with Sexy Sadie is a similar thing where John had ambivalent feelings about Maharishi based on rumors he'd heard, not really substantiated, but he was disappointed or let down because he didn't fit the mother figure that John was looking for. So
the rumors were serious that he
they were
had
serious,
made
right?
Sexual advances against
right.
female guests.
So he went, so a little bit too sexy, are you? So of course, he spilled the beans in a 1971 interview with Rolling Stone, saying, it's Maharishi, not Sexy Sadie, but Maharishi survived. He was still out there. And
George came back later and said, "We were really sorry that happened. It was really unfounded, and it was maybe just an excuse for them to get
John wanted
to go home.
Well, John and Paul were the last ones in Rishikesh, so they wanted to go home.
I think it was John and George.
I thought it was John and Paul. I think they were the last ones there.
George went to another part of India, I think, to do something with Ravi Shankar.
All right, but that being said, that kind of sums up my feelings about where John was. I think in his head, I think he was absorbing everything that was happening. He was making comments about it because he always had something to say about it. And I think he was a little let down by Maharishi, even though he absorbed some of the truth of the teachings and agreed with that. But, again, he was looking for a figure that disappointed him. And I think his own expectations, he even admitted, were a little too high. But you have to dig it because any excuse to get a song down, right? They got a great song out of it.
They also got a great song out of the continuing story of Bungalow Bill.
Sure.
Which is about an American guest, a WASP guest with his mother, and they went, I think they went tiger hunting. It was really quite literal in many ways that he wrote it. And Paul, to this day, said it's one of his favorite songs because it's really about why'd you have to kill that tiger?
Sure. Again, it was a dig at that attitude. What did you kill? It's a very cheery, happy little song, and everyone's singing along. But what did the biting line is, "What did you kill, Bungalow Bill?" And then Yoko chiming in, "Not when he looks so fierce." It's great because, again, that's pure John to me. John was could be extremely biting and sarcastic and critical, and I think that attitude conveyed in those songs really expressed how he felt about it.
And it also speaks to their being ahead of the game of talking about issues that are important, which is treating all species with respect and with love. I mean, here they're passionately writing about the killing of. That Bill did. Bungalow Bill.
He actually did kill a tiger, right? So, and then Paul has picked up the mantle on that recently in recent years. Paul being vegetarian and an animal activist. And I think that movement kind of took off many years later. But again, they were ahead of the curve.
How about Your Blues?
Oh, Your Blues, I should have mentioned that is John wanted to do a straight ahead blues song and great lyrics, references like Dylan to Dylan's Mr. Jones. I think the original line was not "feel so suicidal." It's
feel so insecure.
Feel so insecure, right? Which is probably more true, I think, of John. But I think just to give the song of blues feel, and I think he gave the title as a one-off, Year Blues. It's like, well, Paul said, well, why did you call it that? I said, you don't want to call it Year Blues. It's kind of almost satirical or dismissive when it was actually sincere. So it's a great lyric, and they're all crammed together in a small room. I believe they deliberately moved to almost a closet, a small room where they're all bunched together playing. And also Ringo mentioned, it's one of my favorite tracks because we're actually like a real band. and the guitar on there just rips right into you. The guitar parts of John and I think George, both of them just really, that playing is really, really strong. It's just it just sears right through you, and I think that was the point. It's a brilliant track.
It's a brilliant track, and it does speak to the flavor of recording the White Album, which was the movement away from the overproduction,
right,
which is to distill it and to reduce it to that they were a great band playing at the Cavern, playing in Hamburg, and here they are of cramming themselves into a small, essentially a closet, and creating some of these songs. And when you listen to these, if you have a chance to listen to these alternate tracks or the
demos,
the takes, the demos are more of the acoustic, but the other earlier takes, and to listen to their discussions and their humor, it is phenomenal. I mean, that's my favorite part. I listen to that 10 times more than I do the actual songs these days, because it's the interplay. They're so funny. They're so smart. They're quick as all, and we know these things about the Beatles, but they're truly geniuses.
Well, they all pulled in every single cultural reference of the time, and they're absolutely hilarious. And John, of course, is known for that. So John would go off into another song, and you couldn't help but laugh. And Paul could laugh at himself too. Splinking. What was he called?
No, that was in Rocky Raccoon.
Sminking. Yeah, that's
Jim.
on the anthology, but that's I think it's also on there. But again, they were all self-deprecating, but they kept working, and the number of takes indicates. We'll get to that later, but I think that again, the importance of Yoko being there, giving him this kind of new aura, a boost of fresh energy, of finding himself in a relationship that apparently he couldn't find with Cynthia. And that he was projecting that he was projecting being in love and also being fully heightened and aware of what was happening around them. And we'll get to that too.
I also think that it's leadership as well, is that he kind of reinstituted himself as the leader of the band, and this is how we're going to do things.
I don't think it was a conscious reassertion. I think that when he was open and on it, I think that he naturally was in charge. His energy took over. I don't know if it was more of a conscious decision on his part. I just think that the creativity that came through and the intensity of his experiences gave us that material, and it couldn't help but dominate the record, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and also as some of these Beatle books tend to state, is that that's when he started experimenting with heroin. So I don't know that
right,
whether that's true or not.
Well, they all had various experimentation.
There's a lot of change going on in their personal lives. So,
right.
He had Julia, Revolution Number 9,
right.
the I would call it the performance art montage,
right,
and just wonderful songs. And I think that he had so much to say. That's what he wanted to get these things out there. He had so much to say personally,
sure,
to bring it out there.
He even wrote "Good Night," which Ringo sang,
right?
And there's beautiful versions, actually, I thought, where they sat there and they played and harmonized the versions of that "I'm Bling" on the record that show that they tried out with guitars and harmonies.
That's on the Super Deluxe version?
On the Super Deluxe version that if you don't have that, if you're a fan, you definitely need it. And it's really beautiful. And you can hear what it could have been, other versions, the ways it could have been. It's fascinating stuff. But on another note.
So moving on to Paul. So Paul, Paul did some really great things on this album. But I'm going to start with Martha, My Dear.
Okay.
Which, as you know, Paul says it's written about my dog, his sheepdog Martha, which he had just gotten in, I think, 1966 or at some point. And as I will always say, yes, you may have named it Martha, My Dear, but that song is not about your dog, Paul. And he was...
Here comes a conspiratorial thinking here.
No, this is a woman's intuition, and this is just real life. I mean, come on. He was engaged... to Jane Asher, an actress. Correct. And in July of 1968, she went on a televised interview, and she said, yes, we're no longer engaged. Since we're no longer really together is basically what she said. And apparently she did it without informing him. Now think for a moment. You're Paul McCartney. You are the most eligible man in the world.
Correct.
And you're finding out he was actually up at Rembrandt, his father's home, when this was televised. And you hear that.
Right.
And I think from a pride perspective, now he may not have loved her as much as Linda. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion.
Right.
But from a pride perspective, I think I bet not many people tell him no. And it must have been crushing.
So the song is basically, Martha, My Dear, is an expression of wounded pride.
Wounded pride. And what does he say? Be good to me. Remember, what is
Don't forget me.
Don't forget me.
Right.
It's, I think, very telling. And I think that Paul, when he has these moments, he writes from the heart. And that one came right out of there. And
then you'll note that it's one of the few piano songs on the record. Whole album is mostly guitar based. So you're listening to this piano song that he decided to work with, and
it's a lovely piano playing.
And
he really did an amazing job.
A very good, excellent piano playing on that record. But then again, I mean, I can listen to Paul in later years, and he wrote, "My dog's got 3 legs, and you're got 1." So could he write about something so banal as a dog? I think so. That's quite possible. We might be maybe we're reading too much into this, but maybe not. Because Paul, again, he was a sly guy and smart guy. And I think that he maybe was not consciously to us, but to his former partners, sure, he would be directing things. Because, again, on Ram, he would direct things to John. Some people sleep at nighttime, believing that love is a lie. I'm only a person, too many people preaching practices. Well, he would have these lines that were directed to someone, and you, the listener, if you were not aware of the relationship, had have no idea what that was. It was just a line in a song. Paul could get away with that kind of thing. So maybe you're right about Martha, My Dear, but other songs on there I think are...
well, and then the companion piece to me is I Will, which is the optimism and the hope that finding a deep love. And here he's witnessing this connection between John and Yoko. And maybe subconsciously thinking, I need this.
Who wants a new romance? I mean,
and watching that unfold.
Well, the line, it could be also something just a flirtation or attraction. He's saying, I didn't catch your name. So it's like Girl from Impanina. He's looking at someone down the street and if I ever saw you, that kind of thing. Well, those lines it's meant to just be a siren song. A call out for a search for love and expression of attraction. That's all.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah, it's a great song. I mean, I love the song. I love the chords on it. I love the acoustic guitar and double acoustic guitar work on it. I love the little percussion on the piece.
Yes, he's doing the dum. He's doing
and
the
then
vocal
and the bass is his voice. Dum,
yes.
Doing that. So that's what Paul does. He's very good at it, and that's a beautiful, beautiful song. That was a strong one for me, even when I was young. I loved that. Always loved that tune. And Julia by Lennon was a perfect companion piece following that. Great stuff. And then you had Why Don't We Do It in the Road, which preceded both of them.
One of my favorites. I listen to that all the time. It's just, I love his voice. I remember it as a child. It was just wild. And it was like, what are they doing in the road? And it was like, oh, that's what they're going to be doing in the road. And it was based on seeing monkeys. Right,
based on seeing real life monkeys. Well, monkeys can be very inspiring. And so who else would write about it but Paul, and actually perform most of it by himself? And it was done in between other sessions. And that just tells you that for those of you that haven't been following this closely, the White Album by the Beatles is not all 4 Beatles on every single song. Sometimes John would be out of the room and it would be Paul, George, and Ringo recording a song, like on Long, Long, Long. Sometimes one Beatle or Ringo would be absent and they'd be playing bones, or they were multi-instrumentalists and they were all each learning each other's instruments. Sometimes you don't know who's really playing bass. The picture that you had of them before of Paul on bass, John on guitar, right, is not exactly what happened during the White Album. Although we call it the Beatles, it is the Beatles all working together, but sometimes one Beatle might be missing from the room.
What I see about Paul's evolution on this album is that his lyrics tell such a great story. And for example, Back in the USSR,
Sure.
which was based off, I think, a Chuck Berry Back in the USA song, and
Sure.
like the Beach Boys thing coming in. But really, when you take those lyrics, flew into Miami Beach, BOAC, didn't get to bed last night, all the way the paper bag was on my knee.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
phenomenal visualization of telling a story. The same with Rocky Raccoon. He's becoming this storyteller that is fun to listen to.
Paul's always been a kind of an amateur novelist in his songs. He creates these little novelettes or stories.
Yes, Eleanor Rigby. Yeah.
Right, Eleanor Rigby, that was a predecessor for these songs. But Back in the USSR, well, that was kind of inspired by, I believe Mike Love was, for the Beach Boys, was at Rishikesh with them. And I think the idea came up then, well, let's just pull this off and put a twist on it. And to do Back in the USSR was a great rock piece, a great story. Came out and jarring when you first hear it.
And it's significant because at that time, Paul was really trying to tell Ringo how to play a certain style of drumming on the song, and Ringo had it. I think he left at that point, and that John, George, and Paul ended up adding drums to it to make that drum track work in Ringo's absence. So again, we haven't really touched on the tensions among the group, which, this is like a family dynamic, and you're around them all the time, and sometimes you're not always so nice in what you say, and it's not that they didn't love each other, it's not that they didn't respect their opinions, it was just a different way of interacting.
Right, I mean, they had their own way of working, and maybe some feelings were frazzled. But if Ringo's walking out, maybe Ringo needed a break or didn't feel appreciated or didn't feel, okay, you want this, but maybe I'm not you don't think I'm competent enough to do it. And then it took 3 Beatles, to pull off Ringo's style that they wanted out of that song. And Ringo missed a number of tracks. So how many other tracks, I believe, was he absent on that they were playing drums? And I think, was he there for Glass Onion? Was he there for...
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at that. But he was not there for every single track. Ringo was on vacation and then returned, and then with full force had
got back into it.
Right, Sexy Sadie, and was again 100% committed. When they were working, they were committed. I think now back to Paul. Some of their other tracks, his song like Birthday, a lot of people attribute that as a Paul song. But actually, remember, if you recall, the riff that they came up with was written before the title, before the lyrics were written. That musical riff that we all know and love. And it was really John and Paul together in each other's face writing that song. Am I right?
Yes. And then, Birthday, I think it was basically a 50-50 kind of split among John and Paul writing it, and Paul's enthusiasm with all the screaming in the background and getting them revved up. The other piece I would mention is with Blackbird, and we all love Blackbird. In fact, every guitarist at the Guitar Center, looking at a new guitar is like picking Blackbird. But Blackbird and Paul's perfection and his seeking perfection of how many takes he took and how many different styles of singing that song that he put down. And again, with this White Album, the Beatles had the luxury. They booked the studio from basically 2:30 on till all hours of the morning, and did as many takes as they wanted. And some of these songs are up to 100 takes. But Paul was so insistent on different ways and inflections, and I think they had a little disagreement with George Martin on that. But they get over it. But I mean, I think that when Paul hears something, he's so intent. It's just amazing. Must hear every piece. It's just such a talent and a gift. And Blackbird, I think, is perfect as it is, and I love how his tapping foot is being recorded as well as part of the rhythm.
Oh, sure.
In that.
Oh, sure. Is to give it a feel of intimacy, but. It sounds like it sounds very spontaneous, but it actually was done how many times? 50 times, 60 times. Paul would go, many false starts. Paul would try different vocal stylings. You go to Anthology and you go to the deluxe album, and you can hear Paul trying it all different ways and try different phrasings at the end. But it still comes through. And remember that it wasn't just him by himself. You had, I believe John was at least there in the studio encouraging or offering and saying, maybe you should have strings or horns here, which Paul then taking and using on Mother Nature's Son. Another brilliant little piece, underrated piece that every guitarist to this day plays it in D and picks out that song. And notably, other people started recording it too.
Yes, and it's also a reflection of their time with the Maharishi, which is about nature and being of nature.
That was, I think, its answer to Child of Nature, which was not used on the record, but the melody, John Lennon saved the melody and dumped the lyrics because he thought they were a little bit too pretentious, I guess, and changed it to Jealous Guy on Imagine. So a lot of these songs have their origins, have been around for a while. Sometimes it shows you that the Beatles will keep something on the shelf and then work on it later.
Well, and on that, here's the other side of Paul, which is the British music hall guy who grew up loving that and listening to his dad, who was a musician as well, play that type of music. And here's Honey Pie. And I like Honey Pie. I think it's a great, fun song, but I can see if I'm this is my bandmates and he's bringing all these fruity tooty songs all the time and like Oh Blah Dee, Oh Blah Da. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, but I enjoy it. But Oh Blah Dee, Oh Blah Da, I prefer, I think, one of the earlier takes, which is a little faster. Sounds more straightforward.
Yeah. On that particular song, what I find curious is that even though it seems a bit fruity, it's Paul imagining himself in 1925, that music hall. The other Beatles understood this. I think they knew that he had that background, and if anyone was going to introduce that element into the band, he would. I mean, he did the whole Sgt. Pepper context, but then he wanted to include one music hall song. And when I was young, I remember hearing it and thinking, "Oh, that's bouncy. That's kind of fun." But all four Beatles were actually playing on that particular song, and that's apart from all the instrumentation that was added later. But yeah, they're all on it. So no matter what he chose to do, he'd get the support around him. They'd all be interested. They'd all want to achieve the goal of making it sound like he wanted it to sound.
Well, it goes to their work ethic, and it goes their desire not to be mediocre.
Right.
And whereas others might say, hey, this was good enough, Sexy Sadie, but that, Sexy Sadie John song really evolved, and they spent a lot of time reshaping it, and maybe I think they put it on the shelf for a bit and then went back to it. And it just goes to who they are, that this is what made them so different than everyone else. And
they're very aware of what's happening when they're making it. A lot of us don't see our errors until after we sit down and listen to it. But John would say, okay, this is getting a bit heavy, lads. They would stop and then come back to it a month later. But every single take he had of that, John was looking to be like Smokey Robinson. The world was waiting just for you. And those lines he added, he didn't have all the lyrics lined up in the beginning in the Escher demos. But yeah, and so Paul, very supportive of John's music. I think that a lot of the stuff about their rivalry is way overblown. I think that the two of them were really very similar. They both support each other. Even Linda commented that they're both intense people and they're both rockers and balladeers.
And what she said is that they have a relationship that's so deep that we can't really comprehend it. Something to that extent.
Right. I mean,
and that's true because, listen, they've known each other since they were teenagers.
Right. I mean, they're like little brothers, and so Paul's evolution on this record for me, and then again, let's not overlook Helter Skelter.
Oh, God, yeah, I almost forgot that.
Oh, let's not forget about Helter Skelter, which is, we'll be getting to the social importance later, but again, Paul was inspired hearing some of the louder bands around him and saying that, like the Who's came out with, we're going to make the loudest, nastiest record. And Paul said, really? Okay. So Paul, being competitive as he is, says, no, we're going to do the loudest, nastiest record. And then everything was about distortion and volume.
Well, from one of his earlier interviews, I think in '68, he didn't fess up that it was the Who. he would kind of he was very coy about that. It wasn't
sure.
until later years that he said it was the Who. So
Of course.
that was Paul. And the early takes of Helter Skelter are kind of droning on a bit, and just like you can hear the beginnings of it, but it's nowhere to what it was. And for me, my favorite take is I think it's take 17, and Paul's vocal is amazing, and his singing is just tremendous. The delicacy of the acoustic songs to the powerhouse of Helter Skelter, and ripping his chords out. I mean, his vocal, it's just...
He was capable.
We just didn't hear anything like Helter Skelter ever.
Well, that was Helter Skelter, I think, marked the beginning of Led Zeppelin and all these other bands. I think that it marked the beginning of heavy metal. I think I would call it the very first heavy metal song. Now, there's people out there that can argue with me, but you didn't really hear much of that type of rock and rock
to
music.
To be fair, Led Zeppelin was getting started, and Cream was out there, and that was pretty heavy stuff.
And they were heavy.
And Jimi Hendrix as well. So, I mean, it was just the music was changing, and the flavor and the sound of music was changing in 68. And
but Paul didn't really have that much regard for the song itself. Helter Skelter is actually based upon a ride in UK. It was from a carnival ride.
Which, yes, British people know, but us, the Americans, we didn't really know that.
Americans don't know that. But now, unfortunately, we have different associations with it, but it's a powerful, but again, just as a record and as a recording, I never heard anything like that.
Well, it's also at the lyrics, don't you want me to make you? And it's like, oh, it's so visceral. It's like, it's just... Yeah, okay. Sing that to me, Paul.
Yeah, it's in your face, right? There it is. Yeah, Paul, it's a powerful performance by the entire band. And yeah, they did make the noise. I'm sure the engineers were going nuts, but they really cranked up those guitars and the drumming. Ringo's drumming on that, incredible.
And they had one take that was like 27 minutes of that.
Okay. Any other songs? I think that we're looking at Paul's. How about how about George?
Let's talk about George.
Let's talk about George.
I would say for me, the number one song of George that I enjoy is "Long, Long, Long."
Mm-hmm.
I think it's haunting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's peaceful. I mean, I love Ringo's drumming in it. I think that Paul's playing an organ in the background, and it is just so spiritual and special, and however you apply it into your own life, it is just a beautiful, beautiful song.
Well, that's the thing. He purposely left it vague enough you can interpret it in other ways, but George would tell us later that the you referenced in the song is God. So for him, although he would become more direct in My Sweet Lord, that's what that was about. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, okay, this is a beautiful counterpoint following Helter Skelter, perfect placement on the record. And it's only 3 of the Beatles. Again, an example, not all 4 of them were in the room. John was absent for that recording. He's not playing on that at all. He wasn't there for that. So the 3 of them came up with that record, with that song, and
I think that Paul was very helpful to George in saying, "You keep going at it. You're getting it. It's good." Because George could be very defeatist and I think insecure about his own abilities, and Paul was like, "No, keep going. You got this."
Oh, yeah. Oh, that take. Okay, that I guess that's good enough. We don't have to do it. No, Paul says, "No, we're going to keep going. Do it again." The perfectionist and Paul would want to bring out the best in George, and he did, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful track on there, and then followed by Savoy Truffle. Again, that's another little gem. Cream Tangerine Montelemon. It's a great intro to a song.
And this is a song that's based on Eric Clapton's love of eating a box of chocolates, and that George had said he had really bad teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to have them all pulled out. Is like, yeah, your teeth are all going to be coming out, but it's such a sexy song to me. And it's we were talking about this earlier, Jeff, about, or some other time at dinner or whatever, about the saxophones. And it's just like they're hopping, and that's Chris Thomas.
Chris Thomas, who became later a famous producer, produced Elton John amongst other people in the 80s forward. But Chris Thomas at the time was a very young guy who could
21 years old.
21 years old, and he could play. Well, how many instruments could he play? Karen?
It seemed like he played a lot. Just a lot of things on.
He arranged the saxophones on there, which was brilliant on Savoy Truffle. So that's just another example. And again, there's another piece of genius. One of my very favorite songs, very early on, and still is to this day, is Piggies. What a George being his best sarcastic self. And very funny too. I mean, the line about to eat their bacon, makes the piggies cannibals, basically. The original line before they changed it was to eat their pork chops in the early London.
And apparently his mother added what they need is a damn good whacking.
What they need is a damn good whacking. And when he did it in the demo, I think it's on the anthology version of it. Damn good whacking. He put in more emphasis on that. But it's a hilarious take on aristocratic hypocrisy, it's just such a fun song. It takes you back like it's a Shakespearean time that you just hear that and it's just laughing. Right. And they had fun with it, and they had the I think who added the harpsichord? I think it was
George Martin.
It was George Martin playing on it.
I'm not sure.
I think it was George Martin playing on that. But they gave him an opportunity to really produce there and add those strings.
Well, not only that, and to add the sounds, and that's the other fun thing about this album is that going into the tape bank of Abbey Road to get the blackbird sounds for Blackbird, to get the pig's grunting sound, to get the jet for back in the USSR.
Well, one of the takes, actually, George did the piggy sounds, and then they got rid of it, and then they went for the pre-recorded hog sounds at the end. And it's a great track. That's another classic George song. And then of course,
While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Right. Again, that's George's magnum opus for that record, and how it started off as just a sweet, mournful song. And he mentioned he was reading a book about. He's just picking up one of his spiritual books, and he had been picked a line about gently weeps, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to write about that." So he consciously started writing about that, and it evolved from this quiet, acoustic, mournful piece, which was used later in Love, which is the Cirque du Soleil version with strings added by George Martin 35 years later. But here on this record, it just had a heavier tone and beautiful guitar playing. And of course, there's acoustic guitar on it, but the lead guitar was, unbeknownst to me at the time, was Eric Clapton, George's good friend.
And as George said, when Eric came in, everyone was on their best behavior because of Eric. And Eric worked hard on several versions of the solo and of playing. And you listen to the original demo, and you may be thinking, it's a nice song. Maybe it's okay. But where it started and how it transformed from that rough draft to the final product is outstanding. And it's just... it's so amazing.
Well, let's not forget the beautiful upper harmonies that Paul provided. His voice was never in better shape, and he sang harmonies on a lot of George's songs.
And they sang well together. And if you look at Linda McCartney's photos or any of the photos from the sessions, it looks like they're having a good time. And George is playing his Gibson J200 acoustic, the big, beautiful guitar. Paul is using a Fender jazz bass. And they have a Fender 6, which is somewhat John and George would use to also add bass licks.
Right.
And it's just, I love the photos from that period of how they are. And I just think that after all these years, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, that was like a maybe by John and Paul. And in hindsight, it's like, you're kidding me. But again, it's them working together. It's bringing their magic, their alchemy to create this amazing song. And it's a legacy of his.
Sometimes George's songs didn't hit you right away. They grow on you. And I think after working on the song, they realized they had something special there. So that's why I think that made the record. Remember, they worked on another song of his, which I personally like, was called Not Guilty. But after 100 takes of that, They came up with some interesting stuff, but it really didn't quite make the record, didn't quite fit the record as a band. He ended up re-recording a much gentler version later in '79 on the George Harrison album, which got rid of some of the carousel interludes and all the complexity he tried to throw at the Beatles. It didn't quite gel the way they should have gelled, although I find it interesting to listen to now. I love hearing, the really, great guitar work on it. But again, there's some songs that just, they had a high standard. And
yeah, I think it's just okay. I mean,
yeah, it's just okay.
I would have left it off as well.
Right. I mean, if I were doing editing for the album, I would have left it off the album. But I might have saved, had they stayed together as a band, I think they might have worked on that and made it better. But it just wasn't all there. It was better as a George solo song. But there's many other songs that did not make that record, but there are songs that were recorded around the same time.
And we're going to say that. I mean, This is how fruitful and how amazing these guys are that they've recorded Hey Jude.
Right.
Lady Madonna was earlier in the year.
Right.
And The Inner Light was at the beginning, I think, of '68.
And that's beautiful.
And the Revolution, the faster single, because John wanted to be the A-side. Mm-hmm. There's really no way that there was going to be the A-side with Hey Jude. And so they had to, Paul's like, no, it's got to be, pick it up. And so, again, it's mind-boggling.
Well, they're influenced on one another. I mean, that you don't, when you have the bouncing board and you have Paul saying, let's do another version of it. And that now is the definitive version. And now what people do cleverly when they play it live is they'll add the shoe-op to the fast version. They'll add other sections. The best parts of Revolution 1 that didn't quite maybe gel as well, they turned it into a rock and roll classic. Is a Revolution meant to be quiet? No. George is just profoundly wonderful here in this record. I think he was just beginning his solo career then. I think that he was starting to build up material, and I think maybe he was a bit frustrated that his work wasn't getting noticed or recorded. Like All Things Must Pass was starting around that time.
Well, he collected huge notebooks of all these songs and
Circles.
Certainly learned a lot. Mm-hmm. Circles is okay, but certainly learned a lot from this experience in order for him to be able to produce later on Badfinger and I think Jackie Lomax, whoever he was working with.
Mm-hmm. Sour Milk Sea, I think, right.
I prefer that better. I like that song versus Not Guilty.
And that's a great song, actually. I think they could have really worked on it themselves and kept it for themselves, just how generous they were.
So let's talk about Ringo. I'll tell you about Ringo's, to me, the contribution for Ringo is his drumming.
Yeah.
For me, it's always his drumming. I like Don't Pass Me By, but it's not one that I really listen to all the time. Right. And I honestly don't really listen to Good Night.
Well, Ringo, I think, had a natural affinity for country, and his voice lends itself to that. And I think that they didn't really produce it that way, but that was his very first totally solo composition. It was written a couple years before, and it was strictly, again, an effort. It's not all four Beatles. This is just Paul and Ringo. And Paul and Ringo worked together on many other projects solo since then. You just don't call it the Beatles, but it was on the Beatles record. I think it's a pretty good vocal by Ringo, all things considered. It's a good song. Might consider it filler, but I think it fits easily on the record. I think that it gives him his place. But yeah, you're right. The cutting edge for Ringo here is when he did commit and he played drums, his drumming was just incredible. I mean, listen to Everybody's Got Something to Hide, and For Me and My Monkey. Incredible drumming on that. Incredible drumming on Helter Skelter. Total rock and roll drumming. He fit right in perfectly
on Your
there.
Blues, yeah.
Sexy Sadie, the fills that he does. He's just, no one can imitate that. I think it's just his unique way of playing, and Ringo, again, some of his best performances as a band member on this record really stand out to me.
And a few things, I just think that having the younger engineers, when Jeff Emmerich, he left after I think the 9th song he left, I believe, in mid-July. And so they had Ken Scott, they had Chris Thomas, and this youthfulness. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe that injected some type of enthusiasm with the Beatles. I think maybe they were a little kinder to them. I don't know. but it was whatever it was. It's like, we're going to go on this journey together.
Right. That's exactly, I think, the spirit of it. Remember, these guys, younger guys, were maybe only like 5-6 year difference in age. Beatles, right?
John was 28 at that time.
28, 27, George 25. So they were close in age, but ambitious, and they really wanted to please and wanted to make their mark. And they obviously were extremely talented and versatile and had to take the reins since there was no George Martin in the room. I think it actually...
George disappeared on a vacation for a bit, but did come back.
Right. He came back, but he was gone for a while, so they took the reins. And so the Beatles were looking to them, and how's that sound, and getting their feedback. It was, again, total collaboration because it allowed them to experiment, but also go for the sound that they wanted. And they achieved it. I mean, you look at the role, again, of Chris Thomas in the record, and Ken...
The MVP.
The MVP. He's incredible. And then Ken Scott left. I think, well, you know why he left? I'll tell you why he left. The work ethic. We're going to get to that. The hardest working band in the world. They are.
They are. And, and to put this in context is that while they're recording this album in May of 1968, they're getting Apple Corps, their company, off the ground, where they're signing acts, they're hosting, they're creating the record label. And John and Paul had gone to New York to announce it to the press and to be on Johnny Carson's show. And it just is phenomenal amount of work that they do. And again, working the hours from 2:30 till early in the morning.
Oh, there'd be a 16-hour session, like long. Took about 16-hour sessions. They would work as long as it took to get it because they wanted to finish it while they were in the groove.
Well, not only that, but they had a hard deadline, and which is so amazing. It's like to be able to pull together a double album. And this is a album that was released in November of 1968.
Correct.
And here they started May 30th.
That's a very, very tight deadline. And remember, they're working with 4-track in one studio, then bounced into an 8-track at Trident Studios. So the hours they put in, the reason that Ken Scott left, I was alluding to this earlier, is because he was exhausted. I mean, they really work these poor engineers, having to sit through 16 hours, and that's a long day. But the Beatles put in the work and make the record sound.
And over their career, the hardest workers. I mean, they just constantly produced, and we know as songwriters ourselves how hard it is to write one song and to flush it out, and how long it may take. Or to mix, and speaking of mixing, it was 24 hours to mix this album.
The pace that they went at, I think, is their pacing. I think one day just kind of went into the next. They were constantly working. And then they were trying to also manage a business. They didn't have Brian Epstein controlling the reins anymore because he passed away, unfortunately, in the previous year. So they were trying to start Apple, and they weren't very good or successful businessmen, right? But they really made the effort, and they were ambitious, and they tried it out. So there's too much going on.
And then you also had the drug arrests. You had a lot of things happening personally to them.
Oh, sure. It's happening around them. It's happening to the Stones too. I mean, Mick was arrested. They were all arrested for drug busts. There were staged drug busts also around the time to build up the reputations of local cops. Again, that's part of the cultural context in which the Beatles were in. There was that period before they started. They started their sessions in May of 1968. Well, think what just happened in the United States. Martin Luther King was killed in April. And then I think they were doing a session, and the next day they were doing some interviewing. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June. So there was all kinds of things going on, the context of how they moved on that. And of course that affected them. I think it reflects in the album.
It does. And, this album, when it was released, I think it took 3 weeks to become number 1 on the charts in the U.S. And I've read, I don't know that this is accurate, that it's maybe their most popular or their most highest selling album of all the Beatles songs. I'd have to double check that. I think so, but could be, who knows? Maybe things have changed since
I never tracked their album sales again. Maybe at the time, I don't know what they've been since then. I mean, everyone has a favorite. You can name your favorite. I can say, if I had to name a favorite, I would probably say Revolver for me. But some people say Rubber Soul. Some people say the Beatles, White Album, as it's referred to now. But this is definitely like a landmark piece.
And it, and for some it has a connotation, with the Charles Manson and the
Afterwards,
what
right.
happened with the Helter Skelter and Piggies, where they took it for their own use. And, the Beatles said, listen, we can't control what people are going to do with it. It's not our intent. And,
Right.
We have really
Right.
nothing to do with that.
Right. Well, basically, Paul would comment on that later and say, well, people take a song and build their own meaning into it. And Manson would tell Bugliosi and says, we know, you and I know that you planned these murders. He says, oh no, the Beatles ordered it. Listen to their music. I didn't make the music. That's the music they put out. So he wanted to put the blame on them, but there was no message in there, obviously, for that. And again, this is the craziness of the time when you have
so much going on
around them that they had no control over. So the controversy around that, and the peace and love era had kind of come crash landing. And you also had student uprisings. Students occupying buildings on U.S. campuses, uprisings of students in France almost took over the government entirely. So again, the whole tune of the revolution that John started with in his take on that was in response to what was happening around them.
So a lot of what we've chatted about today is, again, if you read the book that came with the Super Deluxe remaster of the White Album, it's really the 50th anniversary edition, and Giles Martin remastered it, and they've researched it, and there's so much information on the tracks. A lot of it comes from that and from our other readings. And what do you prefer? Do you prefer the Super Deluxe mix of the album, or do you like the stereo remaster of 2009?
The 2009 stereo remaster. I'm a bit of a purist and classicist when it comes to the Beatles songs. I think that the mix that we had become accustomed to and grown up with, as long as they could take that and clean that up and then master it in the same way, as close to the same way as possible, that was the best mix of the record. And I think that Giles made a great effort. There's many interesting things on it. It's very close to the original, but I'm hearing some additional clutter on it or pieces I wasn't expecting. And while it makes for an interesting piece, I don't think it should be as representative of how the album was meant to be heard. However, to his credit, I mean, it's a thankless task to be the son of one of the greatest producers ever and try to match that. And it was done with great passion, but not with the kind of accuracy that I would have preferred. However, the rest of the deluxe album is total must-have. You have to listen to the Escher demos. You have to listen to several discs worth of different takes that we were referring to earlier. They're absolutely fantastic. And the book inside.
And you get the 4 portraits again.
You get 4 portraits. You get the fold out.
And the poster.
That we were talking about at the beginning of our talk today. It's a fantastic piece. So it's definitely a collector's item. So you should definitely have that in your collection if you don't already, and you're a passionate Beatles fan.
Or if you're new to the Beatles.
Or you're new to the Beatles, then this would be a great album for you to get. If every rock musician that I know loves songs on this record and the period that spawned it. So I think that's just overall one of my very favorite records, and I always go back to it. They're the go-to song. This is like a go-to album as far as picking out individual songs for us musicians, modern musicians, to play. Everyone wants to play Blackbird. Everyone wants to play Mother Nature's Son. Back in the USSR, we're all playing this. Everyone plays Birthday. Not as many people try out Glass Onion, but maybe they should. Bungalow Bill, because they were produced pieces. But all of these songs have a peculiar character to them. And I think you're hearing the Beatles' individual selves come out more on this record, but still in the context of a band. And I think that's what made it a really strong record in terms of the writing, in terms of the performances, because they were allowed to express themselves a little more deeply than they had in the past without the artificial production constraints that they had built up for themselves through Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour. They were freed up to rock again, and that's what this record sounds like. It's like a celebration of rock.
It is, and it's the texture and it's the illustration of how they evolved and how they continued to grow as people, and never wanted to be stagnant. And that is something to aspire to at all points in life.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and chatting about our favorite things. And I was just going to say that, it's like the family dinner. Right. Even in these times, we're not quite having a dinner here. We're just having a chat.
Right.
And these are kind of the chats that we've always had. And so I want to thank you. We both want to thank you for joining us today. And we hope that you will check back with us for our next episode. And we're going to work out which album we want to tackle next. And thank you so much for listening to the Thank God for the Beatles podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.